So let's talk about the wars of Louis XIV. He fights pretty much every year of his reign. He will be out on horseback leading armies or wanting to lead armies. He's not a great commander, but he loves it. He calls it the sport of kings. War is the sport of kings. This is what kings do. You know, they are in the palace during half the year, and then the other half of the year they're out fighting wars against each other. And it's not they're trying to kill each other. They just want to show who the greatest families are. So the wars of Louis XIV, what's this all about? What is he doing besides just enjoying it? Well, this goes back to Richelieu. Richelieu had fought some wars trying to accomplish something, and Louis XIV will also too. The idea of France's natural frontiers. What are France's natural frontiers? Well, let's talk about it. France's natural frontiers in the south, there's ocean. Wherever there's ocean, you can see a natural frontier. Here's a mountain range. That's kind of natural. The ambiguous part comes in these German states here, in these Italian states here. How far should France go here and here? And the idea becomes basically the Rhine River. The Rhine River right here, Louis will start looking for this Rhine River as a good natural boundary, and then maybe somewhere a little further to the east in the Italian states. And again, Louis just loves war, and he loves what he's doing. He basically wins. He wins pretty much his wars in his early years. So he loves it. Here's a picture of him as Mars, the war god. Lots of paintings of him as Roman gods, and here he is as Mars. And then here's a picture of basically where the fighting will be. Some fighting along in Spain, some fighting here in Italy, but lots of fighting here as the French try to drive toward the Rhine River. They're pressing toward the Rhine. And this will be into Belgium and eventually even into Holland. And of course, this will draw the attention of the rest of the world as everyone's in fear of these French armies because he's winning. The warfare is called the Age of Limited Wars. We look back and call it the Age of Limited Wars. These wars are limited. They're not trying to destroy other countries or other kings. Just little small pieces of territory are taken back and forth. It's actually kind of boring. Lots of fortresses and sieges. This was done at the time. Build these fortresses and then spend months and months knocking down a fortress and then spend the next year with the enemy attacking your fortress. So lots of fortresses and lots of sieges, back and forth. These things take forever to do anything much. The French lead the way with fortresses. They had the genius of fortress warfare. His name was Vauban. He was a commoner, went up through the French army and made it all the way to the marshal through his genius. He is the one who figured out that the best fortresses are star-shaped. This is looking down on a fortress. The best fortresses are star-shaped, and then other stars expanding from those. So you'll have stars within stars. This prevents the idea of a cannonball being able to hit anything really solidly. And of course, these are raised stars on top of stars. So they're lower, they're not huge, tall castles, they're kind of over miles and miles, kind of raised stars. This requires science. France leads the way in military science. These men designing these fortresses like Vauban will have university educations and then specialized educations in military science, all kinds of mathematics involved in these fortresses. If there ever is a battle, and there aren't many in these initial wars, not a lot of field battles, the open field battles will be fought with rules. The nobles will meet before the battle. The two commanding generals will ride out and see each other and talk, and then, of course, they're all intermarried with each other, and the regiments will move like chess pieces, trying to corner each other, and eventually one side will win and push the other side off the battlefield, and then they'll fight again maybe a couple months later. So just really not really exciting stuff, at least in the early wars. Until you get to the last war. The last war of Louis XIV is called the War of Spanish Succession. It starts in 1701 with the death of King Carlos II of Spain. King Carlos II of Spain, if you see his picture here, something wrong with him. The Spanish, through the years, into the 1500s and the 1600s, have been marrying a little too closely with their relatives, and by 1700 here, you get some genetic freaks. He fortunately could not reproduce, so the family line dies with him. As he's getting ready to die, there are two wills pop up. One will willed Spain to a German prince, and then the other will appears and gives Spain to a Bourbon. That's Louis XIV's family, the Bourbons. So, which will do you think Louis XIV wants? Well, The rest of Europe wants the German prince, and Louis XIV is going to grab that one will and attempt to assert his family into the Spanish throne. This sets Europe off. You know, you've been fighting wars upon wars against Louis XIV, and he's been winning. Now if he takes over Spain, you'll have to fight France and Spain united. So this causes Europe to form a great alliance. A great alliance forms against Louis XIV. Who's leading the great alliance? Well, Britain, Holland, and the Holy Roman Empire. There's also a religious edge to this too. Again, if you think Louis XIV is a religious crusader, and of course Spain definitely is, this seems like a Catholic war against Protestants. And so you see a lot of Protestantism here. Great Britain, Protestant, Holland, Protestant, and a lot of these Holy Roman Empire states are going to be Protestant. In fact, some of the Catholic states won't participate or actually join France. So it does take on the aspect of a religious war. We don't call it a religious war, but a lot of people are religiously motivated in this. The leader of the Grand Alliance is William III, the Duke of Orange, now King of England, William and Mary. He comes over with his wife in 1688, and this is now 1701. So they've been there for a while as King of England and the Duke of Orange, leading the Dutch. So he's the leader of both of those, so he'll be running the war. There's one big battle I want to mention. It's the Battle of Blenheim. The French were marching toward Vienna to basically destroy the Holy Roman Empire. At the Battle of Blenheim over in Germany, the Allied commanders for the Grand Alliance were John Churchill. Perhaps that name will ring a bell. Later on you'll be learning about Winston Churchill in World War II, saving England in World War II. Well, this is his ancestor, John Churchill. And then the German commander, a guy named Eugene of Savoy, a mercenary who took over the Holy Roman Empire armies. The battles in 1704, this early in the war. The French and the Bavarians, this German state, a Catholic German state, marching on Vienna to get rid of the Habsburgs and to seize the Holy Roman Empire. So this could destroy all these German states and give France all the way to the Rhine. So here's the battle. It's fought along the Danube River. Here's the Danube River right there. The French and Bavarians are advancing this way, and then Churchill is going to come marching into them right here, and then Eugene of Savoy over here. Well, I told you before that most battles at this age, there's a lot of diplomacy and a lot of etiquette. There is no etiquette here. John Churchill just comes storming toward the enemy. It's very uncouth, very gauche to do this. And of course, the casualties are just off the chart. These are the times when these soldiers, in their fancy uniforms and their expensive muskets, you just don't do that, and Churchill does. And his army will crush the enemy. Here he is just driving through the French army, and there's Eugene of Savoy driving through the enemy, just marching into the enemy guns. You just don't do that. This isn't done. John Churchill will be called the Butcher because his casualty rates are so high. And then he wins the battle and becomes the Duke of Marlborough, and will be given a palace called Blenheim Palace. So that's where the Churchill ancestry comes from, the Duke of Marlborough. Well, that's one victory, and it saved the Holy Roman Empire. But the war drags on. That was 1704, 1705, 1706. War just drags on. There are some other great battles. John Churchill will confront the French in great battles. But let's wrap this war up. The war ends around 1713, 1714. There's a whole series of treaties. Again, a lot of countries involved here, lots of treaties. But what happens here is that Louis XIV claims victory. His grandson will stay on the throne of Spain. So that's a victory, right? That's what this war was all about in the first place. His grandson, Philip of Anjou, will now become Philip, the King of Spain. However, there is a clause in there saying that the thrones cannot be united under one person, so you'll have the Bourbon King of Spain and the Bourbon King of France, not under one person, but surely the family can get along. They're both Bourbons. Well, it turns out in history they don't get along. France and Spain will become enemies even though they're both under Bourbons. But Louis XIV doesn't know that at the time. So he claims victory. Spain will be able to keep quite a bit. They'll keep a lot of their empire in North and South America, but this is where you'll start to see the pieces starting to get chipped away. This is where we mark the demise of Spain. If you're wondering, when did Spain stop really being effective? It's right here. The end of the War of Spanish Succession, this is pretty much the death knell for Spain as any kind of a power. I mean, they continue to be respected, but this is the decline. And eventually, within a couple hundred years, America will be knocking the Spanish around. So this is the demise of Spain. They'll lose their European holdings. They lose Italy and lose Belgium. They own those. And so the Bourbons get Spain, but it's a not powerful Spain. And then finally, France, when you look at this, Louis XIV claims victory in the war, but what we see as historians is he has ruined his country. France comes out of this war with enormous debts. These last few years, Colbert had died, and these last few years he wrecked all that money that had been put away. He'll end up blowing it trying to win the war desperately at the end. Well, on the positive side for him, he was quite prolific as a father. He'll have many children, and his children will have many children. Here's a family portrait packed full of the Bourbon family. So no problem here with trying to find a descendant, although he outlives his sons and his grandsons. And you'll end up with his death in 1715, and you'll end up with his great-grandson, Louis XV, as a boy king. So he lived a little bit too long, had a great family, but all that's left when he dies is a small child again. So we have a string of small children rulers, and you'll end up with a regency for Louis XV. Well, the problem with this is, now that Louis XIV is dead, he never really trained anybody. You know, he had been trained by Mazarin. He never trained anyone. And so how do you do this? How do you, this regency especially, how's it going to run this absolute government? There's no one to do it. In fact, the regency will be nobles who want to take away royal power. And into this, of course, you have to put that crushing debt. France is absolutely broke by the time Louis XIV dies. And so France, we can mark this period, 1715, as France being on top of the world under Louis XIV, and then at his death, France is going to sink very quickly to the bottom. This is 1715, and we know the French Revolution comes in 1789. That is, do the math, 74 years. In 74 years, France will go from first to absolute worst because Louis XIV has wrecked that country.